Welcome back. Welcome in. This is Country Roads Confidential at earsports.com. It's a Paramount podcast. I am Mike Casazza, joined by Chris Anderson. Monday morning after a West Virginia football game. Chris, last season, that mostly meant the Mountaineers had won. Not so to start off 2024, which is not so surprising. They play a top 10 team that probably came off better than people expected in a road game to start the season. The opposite part of that, though, is that West Virginia looked like it wasn't prepared and wasn't anywhere near the caliber of a team that could beat a top 10 opponent at home to start a year. And that's kind of where our frustrations begin today. Obviously, as we hit the Q&A portion of the week, subscriber episode, people who have VIP access ask questions. We try to answer as best as we can, get through as many as possible. Chris comes through, answers the rest in a written format. We don't want to wait for the game any longer, Chris. I'm not sure people want to relive what happened Saturday, but people have a ton of questions, pages of them. A lot of them kind of go over the same things, which leads me to this. My question to you is groupthink right here? Like, kind of like what you see is what you get. Everybody has the same question, the same observation, and perhaps they're right. Because I think about what we talked about in our post-game podcast. Really wasn't that complicated. You looked at the game, you saw what happened, and that pretty much explained it. I kind of feel like the questions are indicative of that too.
Yeah, and it's a tough spot to be in because if that's the truth, if it's just simply that Penn State was more prepared, they were more talented, and West Virginia just fell apart and overwhelmed by the moment, that's not great. It's almost like if you are a WVU fan, you do not want that to be the truth. You want there to be some other reason, and I don't know if that's why so many questions are being asked, why there's so much angst and people upset on the board, or if it's just this was not a performance that they were prepared for. So yeah, the group thing's real. A lot of the questions are similar, which is understandable. You understand why people are asking these questions. Um, but we will do our best to try to differentiate a few of them from the rest, answer them. Again, I will answer the rest in the mailbag. You ready to go, Mike?
Yeah, I don't really have any more questions for you. I kind of wondered if it was that simple again. It kind of seems like that we're going to get down to that answer right away. So yeah, why wait?
Well, let's start off with an old standby. Your favorite, your personal favorite. New Era asks, "What level should my panic meter be registering?" What did we say was norm? 5 was norm, right? Like,
Yeah, I generally float between 4.5 and 6.5, right? Just
yeah,
because like some days are cool, some days are not cool, but like they're always going to land kind of in the middle. Five doesn't seem right. Nothing's a five. Listen, the part that worries you, you go in knowing that the talent is going to be skewed when it comes to individual matchups. And you kind of hope that you can win some of those or you don't get beaten so badly. And you can stay in the game, win the game. I get that. And you even know the collective talent matchup is going to be skewed. Like you're going to have more checks on the Penn State side. You can deal with that as anticipation and reality. Just that it is what it is. Like that's the roster, that's recruiting, that's resources, all that stuff. The part that concerns you is the my players had anxiety. They were not ready for this, and I didn't see it coming. That's a heck of a word salad that nobody wants to sample. You just don't want a team that isn't ready for it, but also knows it isn't ready for it and kind of performs in a way that indicates that everybody thought something else was going to happen or it was going to be easier or very far from the reality that we explained that I think is commonly accepted when it comes to those, again, individual and collective matchups. So I don't know if it came through with snaps, like physical snaps. I don't know if it came through with execution, missing blocks, doing stuff that was just out of character. But that's a hard thing to accept because that costs you a game or at least a chance to be relevant or competitive in a game. I don't know the cost in the game for that to be the thumbnail explanation for your head coach, who isn't very popular as it is, right? In a situation like that would really make you think about what's going on under that tent over there. So that would certainly have my attention. So with that being new information, Chris, you got to go above a 6.5. You got to go like 7, I think, because it's just new and different. I wouldn't go a whole lot higher because you lost to Penn State. You would go a whole lot higher if that happened against Ohio U. Just the nature of the explanation, which really, we haven't heard anything like that before. Anxiety, stage fright, performance fears, whatever you want to call it. That's new and different. That would concern me because they're going to have to play big games on big stages. They want to do anything that they've talked about.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because this was another part. This was a different question. That's what I was just looking for over here. If anybody's watching and wondering what I'm looking at, I was looking for this kind of statement and question from Wampus, who finishes things up by saying, "Mountaineers have always walked where angels fear to tread, and now we are fielding players with anxiety." I think you know where my question is headed, and I'll stop there and ask for your thoughts and insight on this because I believe this is a very serious underlying issue that needs addressed. I agree if this anxiety carries over to another game. If it becomes a trend, I would say, like, and I know based off of many of the other questions that a lot of fans would argue this is a trend. WVU always seems to have quote unquote anxiety when they face a top 25 team, but that what you saw, especially in the first quarter, because it was happening to both teams. And
Yeah.
Mike, I know you were in the press box, but they were talking about it, like the TV broadcast. Gus Johnson, they were talking about it. They were saying, "Look, whichever team calms down, it's going to be fine." But Penn State was having the same issues. They were still. I don't know if they were. I don't think they were coming in overwhelmed about, say, talent matchup with West Virginia, but maybe the environment again that West Virginia was putting on and the moment of the game, and they were overwhelmed as well. So having anxiety or being overwhelmed about a moment doesn't immediately, with the one-time thing, kind of just throw everything off for me. It's not wildly disqualifying, but if this becomes a trend, this is they head to Pitt in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and they're like, oh crap, we're on the road against a rival. Then there's a problem. There's something else going on.
I'm more willing to chalk that up as a one-off than a trend right now, just because that's the game that they didn't like, apart from Houston. I guess Oklahoma. But what I mean, like, they don't have a chance to get Houston or Oklahoma back this year. They have a chance to get Penn State back. And what you do in the Big 12 one year can be, vindicated the next year or supported the next year. You don't get Penn State very often. And when you have an entire season and then off season to look forward to that game, that is going to get your heart rate going a lot more than a Big 12 game would, or even a Pitt game would. Throw in all the stuff that happened beforehand. I mean, they had national media visiting town to do interviews. They had Pat McAfee. They had this and that on top of the regular things that come with an opener. And then just the number of people who were new to this, Chris, just new to it. I mean, you had the transfers, the freshmen. You have no one has had that noon spotlight. No one has had a home game against a top 10 team. They didn't manage that very well. And you could let players be players for all that. That's just human nature. And I wonder if Neil Brown steps back and goes, I should have filtered things better. I should have done this. I should have said no here. I shouldn't have done that, or I should have done this instead. That's probably a big part of his review in the last 48 hours, I would think, I would hope. And I just wonder if that set of circumstances, as unique as it was, pops up again this season before, a Big 12 title game in Dallas. That's the only thing I could think of that would be on par with this, provided they get to the playoff, right? But if they're going to do anything, they're going to have to get to Dallas, and they better be better at this by that time because they'll played a bunch of big games, and then they should have this experience as kind of like a, I don't know, trial run for what happens or what has to happen or to be better in Dallas. So I wouldn't freak out yet about this unless they freak out again.
Which, yeah, here is part of the question from C. Ray Cool, formerly Cray Cool. If we lose to you know who, Pitt, does that pretty much set the tone for the next 9 games? I think that's mentioned it in my two make or break games article before the season, and some people kind of hopped in and were like, "Oh no, it's this game and this game. It's not Pitt. It's Pitt. It's always been Pitt. It's always going to be Pitt." And if you again starting out 0-1, which we'll get to in a minute, was kind of, let's say, expected for most people. So coming into the Pitt game in week 3, the expectation 95% of the time is 1-1 with a loss to Penn State and a win over Albany. And in this moment against Pitt, yes, at Pitt, but it's a bad Pitt team or should be a bad Pitt team. That's not one you can. I mean, they looked good in week 1,
Yeah.
but that's not one you should lose. So yeah, if things go south again in week 3, that is most certainly going to set the tone for the rest of the year.
Yeah, if you can't win at Pitt, how are you going to win at Oklahoma State, at Arizona, so on and so forth? I understand that. I don't know how bad Pitt is. There were some whispers coming out of there that that could be a sleeper in the ACC because the conference isn't all that, but they also they really like their quarterback, and there might be some skill around him. I'm not sure how much you take from a Kent State win, but Kent State's not Albany, for example. Um, we'll see what happens. They play Cincinnati this week, right? They lost to Cincinnati last year, and that was kind of a tone setter. Everybody knows how I feel about Cincinnati. I'm not sure what Pitt has. I'm not sure what Cincinnati has, but that'll be a big answer game for me as far as like what to expect from two teams I have my eye on. So I wouldn't chalk that up as an automatic yet. And if anything else, like if you thought West Virginia was going to be so good to run with Penn State on Saturday, you probably have to calibrate things if you think that West Virginia is good enough to just go into Pitt and win that game. I can't extend that courtesy after what I saw on Saturday because preparedness does matter. Can they get up for that game after, what's going to be a misleading Saturday against Albany? I don't know. We'll see.
Maryland Ear 15 asks, does this performance change your outlook on the possibility of WVU being a Big 12 contender this season?
It keeps my antenna up for certain parts that I just think people naturally had concerns about. That defensive line is going to need bodies. They only ran the 7 out there, Chris, and the 7th was Derek Burlitz. I don't know what type of, and he's a walk on who just more like a physically mature guy. I think that's why he plays instead of like an Elijah Kinsler or even a Nate Gabriel. Realistically, Chris, what will Gabriel, Kinsler, Byerson, Zach Keith, what will they change on that defensive line? Are they gonna get Sean Martin in the backfield more? Are they gonna get Fatorma Mobo clogging up the A gaps more? Are they gonna get Ed Vistaranen just more active than I mean, yeah, he's got a great motor, but the production has to probably increase for this particular line. Like he can be serviceable in the past, but for this defensive line to be effective and better, he will have to have more effective and better performances than he has throughout his career, which is a heck of a critique because everybody likes what he's done up to this point. It's a different game now. I don't know what depth there is going to do because that second line of Redwood, Russell, and Jackson is okay, but none of those guys are making plays. That's a concern I think people had. Feel better about linebacker after seeing that in action. Cornerback, we'll see. That secondary just I don't know what it was, but it was cramps in the second half. I think they had some players they were worried about, like Kikora Tarnu only played 9 snaps, and they were eventful snaps when he was in there. I don't know that you can ball that up and throw it away yet, but some of the stuff on defense, I think we have some more answers to and we had to know more about the defensive line and the secondary and how that was going to fare in the Big 12. That concerns me a little bit because I just don't know how that's going to change on the defensive line. They can't go out and get somebody, and some of those players just kind of are who they are at this point. And I don't know what depth or true freshman depth is going to do for you. And then offensively, I just don't believe that was West Virginia on offense. Not at its 10 out of 10, not at its 8 out of 10. And that 8 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 is there, and that just wasn't it. The trouble is, um, how much can you play in the last season's 5-1 stretch where we've done this before, where some of the stats that really matter to them, like time of possession, total snaps, rushing yards per game, rushing yards per attempt, they were elite. They were all like top 10 in the country across the last half of the season for that. Um, but we saw those teams they played. That schedule comp isn't very fair sometimes, but it's relevant when you have your way against teams that are beatable. But the teams that are more competitive, you might struggle with. They're going to play teams that are more competitive, and they might struggle with them. So they're not going to play that Penn State defense many times, if another time this season, but they're not going to play a bunch of stiffs either. And they're going to probably have to get into some ping pong matches to be very good on offense in spite of their defense or because of the other team's offense. And I don't know about that right now based on what I saw.
Next question from Ears Fan 03 says, Why was the offense intentionally and consistently running the play clock down and waiting to snap it under 5 seconds for the vast majority of the game, including the opening drive?
That's just who they are. They
Yep.
love time possession. That's a stat they really like, and I think they were playing a long game. Get this deep into the third and fourth quarter, have possession, wear them down. That's what I would think. There's no, they weren't sitting on the lead, right? That's just who they are. Best answer I have for you.
Um, Here we go. Luke Zoolander 01. If you're coach after seeing the performance, what changes and tweaks are you making to the depth chart on offense and defense?
On defense, you got to get Jaheim Joseph out there more. Just flipping through the game yesterday, he looked like he knew what he was doing. Just again, the plays maybe weren't evidence of that, but he communicated, he talked, he got stuff, he got in the spots. I thought that was important. I would really think about TJ Jackson and Sean Martin because Martin can't play that many snaps and not get in the backfield and not make a play. And Jackson played fewer snaps and was more active. And again, not just because he recovered a fumble, but 3 tackles and he had a couple pressures. He chased the ball a few times. You would think about that one there. I don't know what you can do at cornerback. You missed Jacoby Spells a little bit, but I'm not sure he saves you there. So you probably have to keep that stuff in. And then offensively, just where's the juice, Chris? They had these ideas to get Gallagher and Farmer in, and I'm not sure Gallagher played enough. I understand he played some defense, and he's got to get ahead of Traylon Ray to be the number one slot guy. And again, Ray's not a slot guy, but they're trying to get their best 3 receivers out there, and he's certainly in that group. But just the one time that Gallagher touched it on the screen, it just looked different. And you're gonna have to be creative and find ways to go do this. And we mentioned this sometime before the game, but like last year, Jaheim White didn't play against Penn State. Rodney Gallagher had 1 snap. They became important parts of the team. You've got to create ways to get your guys who have juice the ball. And if you're worried about Jaden Bray missing assignments or dropping passes, you got to find something that he's not going to blow the assignment and he gets a handoff, or maybe he was supposed to on the play that hits him in the shoulder. I don't know, but you've got to find ways to get your needle movers out there so they can actually move the needle. Just playing pitch and catch with Fox and Clement and Taylor isn't going to do it. Running screens because you rehearse them a whole lot, you can't bank on your execution being better. You're going to have to find ways to dream up 1-on-1 or 1-on-0 and make it happen. And that would be an easy opponent to do that against. Go out and do it live against people who don't know you. You're not playing West Virginia against West Virginia. You're not playing West Virginia against Penn State. It won't be West Virginia Pitt. It's going to be Albany, but it's 11 different people and it gets you some things. And if you can find a way to get, I'm not saying you got to force feed Rick Farmer touches, but you should probably get guys who can make people miss and run away from people, get them the ball on the move in space somehow, and rehearse it this week and try to figure out what works in games and what doesn't, because just being stationary in the pocket and just running slants and posts and outs, that's not going to be explosive enough, and they know that because they were field stretchers last year and you just didn't see that, which again, that's the defense. But if you can't take the top off or whatever, you're going to have to find ways to manufacture some stuff, and they didn't do that.
Yeah, and I may be biased about this part here, but it was a question that I asked rhetorically in my depth chart projection for safety. And I said, with Wilson being hampered by an injury that kept him out there for what, half of fall camp. Is that fair? Maybe not
Roughly.
quite that long, roughly that. But because of that, what Joseph didn't really get his opportunity to compete for one of the safety spots because Wilson was out, so they just moved Tarnu over, and then Tarnu and Joseph just played side by side instead of going head to head and competing for one spot. And I said it's actually hurting his chances of getting that starting job because they're not actually getting to see him at the position they want to try him out for the fall. Because yeah, I mean they flipped quick, like 9 snaps. That was that 2 drives. And they were like, nope, nope. And Joseph went the rest of the way. Um, that's again, obviously, that's one that I think you mentioned it. I'm mentioning it here. Everybody else is. It's not like some secret. That's one to keep an eye on. I like the wide receiver talk. You got to find guys that are going to make plays. Um, I'm really curious what's going to happen on offensive line.
Yeah.
There were some comments made in fall camp. Hey, not happy with the right side of the offensive line. Then you see some of the stuff that's happening during the game. You see him getting beat up like that. Um, we'll see. The problem is, I think Neil Brown said he said on Thursday night they felt comfortable with 8, I believe. I'm not sure who 7 and 8 are, or even if it's 6, 7, 8.
Who's
But
6?
yeah, I was gonna say. So I don't know who's going to be able to step in there and fill in that spot. How they're going to move it? Are they going to try to move these guys around? I mean, again, Yates has played tackle, guard, center. Hubbard has played tackle and guard. Nick Malone has played tackle, guard, center. These are all guys that have moved all around throughout their career at West Virginia. Will there be more movement? I I would, if I were the coach, I'd start experimenting this week. I mean, I would have already been experimenting, especially if I, were vocal about the issues I was having with the offensive line. But that's one I'd keep an eye on. Yeah, that's
Also, I would get people who could just motion and formation without imploding. More and more I think about that, Chris. That's Can we get to that one real quick? I don't know if there's a
yeah. I
question
was gonna
about.
say there were multiple. I was trying to find
Okay.
the there was somebody who termed it well, but there were multiple questions about that um, with the motion. Here we go. I mean, WVU SNIDS. He says, Neil Brown stopped running motion because of the early miscues. There was a 2 hour delay. Could you fix the timing of that during the 2 hour break? Um, there were a couple other ones in there because, as it was clarified, Neil Brown said those snap issues were not the center.
Okay. Stop here.
Yes. Go.
'Cause this is where I'm at. Nobody should be able to run your offense better than your quarterback. And if he wasn't the maestro back there, and it wasn't the center, he was clear about that. Like, what happened? Did Garrett Green just forget the timing? Because Garrett Green didn't botch another conventional snap the rest of the game. And I never saw that happen last year when they were very motion happy. What happened there? Like, and again, maybe that's one of those things where he was just bewildered after the game and he didn't have an answer. I think it's a fair question for today, the news conference. Just to be clear, like, one, it wasn't your center, just correct. Okay, cool. That indicates it was your quarterback, and you never got back to it. Like, I would think that if you can't trust someone to get back to it, look, your center might have the yips. That can happen. And you might not want to put him in a position to be yippy and then have to take him out of the game. So what do you do then? You remove the problem, which would be motion. But he said it wasn't the center. You're not removing Garrett Green. I understand that. You're not taking him out of the game because he has yips. You just kind of tilt the offense a little bit and you take away some of that, what do they call it? Eye candy, window dressing, which is, again, that is prohibitive for the offense. We've been over that. So the quarterback can't get that right again. You don't trust your quarterback to solve that problem that happened early in the game. I don't like do it on the sideline. Get the iPads out, excuse me, the Surface Pros out and look at it. Spend those 2 hours and just get them in the like, hey, I need you and I need you and you. You're gonna motion, you're gonna snap. Got it. Let's go. And you work on that in the tunnel. Like, is it that easy? I don't know, but there's just a lot of explanations out there why you have a veteran quarterback who's done this countless times. And I would say, let's say two hands. On two hands, you could count the number of times that's happened. Maybe seven, not 10, maybe six. Just it doesn't happen. And that wasn't correctable or given time to be corrected. The more I think about that, that's a big problem in the game, and I don't know how. So, listen, sometimes when something happens, you're not expecting it, you don't have an answer for it because you weren't prepared. That a lot of time and also like a lot of trust in the player to get that right. I don't know who on offense I would trust more than Garrett Green to solve a problem, and that didn't seem like it went that way. The whole thing needs some further clarification, I think,
And I
if
think,
only
and
for our
there's a,
understanding, not to critique, just to understand it better.
yeah, and for everybody listening, we're recording this Monday morning before press conferences with players, coaches, Neil Brown, and because there's a second part of this, which was another question related to it, and you asked it, you mentioned it, or I don't know if you asked it, you mentioned it in the game thread because you mentioned, hey, are they signaling in place even though they have new helmet communications? Because you pointed out they got the flags up, or the blankets so that nobody can see uh, what's being signaled in. And WV Blessed said, could you talk about why the pre-snap motion was completely abandoned? What was throwing off the sequence that couldn't be fixed in between series? And did the new headset communication have anything to do with it? Was there headset communication? You're right. Like they were signaling in place. And again, you said, hey, this is a Monday question, and I'm going to ask it. So I'm with you. I think this is one that needs clarification because it could all be related. The headset communication, the motion, the confusion, all of it.
Part of your signal from the sideline is motion and pre-snap stuff. That's part of the call. Yeah, I just think it's a fair question. Again, not to be critical, but just out of curiosity because it definitely played a part in the game. When you cannot, when you want to go 3-by-1 and you line up 3-by-1 instead of 2-by-2, you are making it easier in the defense. And West Virginia last year, when it was running very well, not running, operating very well, it was moving the pieces before the snap and not giving a defense time to reset and reassess and go. And Penn State didn't have to reset and reassess. Penn State sat back, said, okay, here's the formation still. And they went.
Here's another question that had a couple different variations throughout the message board thread. But
Yeah, you
Patio
can
Toad,
Google Neil Brown buyout. You don't have to ask me the question.
I wasn't going to put
Wrote
you on the
about
spot
this.
on that one. I was going to give you some time. Uh, Patio Toad 2021. He says, give you WVU fans and other fans some reasons to keep the faith. For me, it is not as much the embarrassment of a one lopsided loss at home to Penn State as how I was slapped with the realization that despite all the hype created, WVU is never going to compete with the top programs in the new era of college football. I used to believe WVU could build to compete for college football championships every so often, given the right coaching staff and athletic department. Mike, give Patio Toad some hope. Is this the slap in the face of realization that this is the new world of college football, that there is a top five? Because well, first off, there was another question here related to it, and let's put the second piece here. There is the top three or four teams, for instance, the Georgia playing Clemson, which was supposed to be
Mhm.
a what, number one versus number 13 or number three, whatever top couple team versus number 13 team, shouldn't be that big of a difference. That was a joke. That was absolutely also one-sided joke.
Mhm.
Is there tier A, tier B, and then no one else can even compete? Is that just what it is? Or is that what it's always been?
Yeah, I think it always has been the the boundaries and the borders for those tiers, they were kind of like a little bit more fluid before you can get in and slip out and all that stuff. It's more defined now just because of resources and money. And because the way that the sport has changed, it's reinforced that idea by putting your major programs in the same conference. And sooner or later that gets through recruits and transfers. Like, oh, I'm supposed to be here. If I want to be good, I'm supposed to go here. That happens. And that's been happening for a couple of years. What's sobering about the observation that he makes here is that yeah, while that has kind of been this way, and there was always hope before, that hope is kind of extinguished a little bit because, for example, for West Virginia, you would think, all right, this is a recruit, retain, develop program, and every 3 to 5 years, maybe once or twice in that 5 year window, you are really good and you're competitive and you win a conference championship or you compete for a conference championship. And you might have a good core that can do that, like I said, twice in 5 years, once every 3 years, something like that, because you've retained and developed players who are good their junior, senior years. And there's enough freshmen, sophomores, whatever, to add in at that time and make your veteran core a little bit more dynamic and exciting. But then those young players become part of your veteran core. You know what I mean? That's been like the West Virginia carousel for a while. Chris, the sport is so annual now, so year to year when it comes to roster talent, that developing players is fine. You might have a very veteran group, but guess what? The team that wasn't very veteran that entire time you were developing, they went out and they bought players, acquired players. And now they're going to have a two deep that is as talented and maybe as experienced individually, not collectively, as yours. So that advantage you've been working for, that soup you've been stirring for so long, it's cool, it's good. But while you were working, others were sleeping. They just went out and they bought the ingredients. They went out and bought the soup. They didn't make it. They just bought it. And that's the big difference right now, is that the plan is still going to work. You're still going to have a competitive team every, 3 to 5 years, conference championship contender. But guess what? In this 16 team league that has some similar programs as far as that philosophy comes, there's going to be others that are in the party because they can go out and acquire the players every year. It's an annual basis thing now. And then you just go outside of that. Once you do get out of the Big 12, you have to see Big 10 and SEC teams that are going to do the exact same thing when it comes to elite talent acquisition. And again, that's a sobering reality, I think. I think that's a pretty fair observation, not necessarily because of Saturday, though that may reinforce it, as opposed to like it's just the way it is and has been for 2 years now.
All right, I'm going to, let's say, summarize. I'll bite the bullet and directly answer some of these in the written format, but there were multiple questions related to Neil Brown being too loyal to his coaching staff. Is that a fair comment? Is he more loyal than, say, your standard college football coach, or is this, or is this just trying to find somebody to be upset about because of the game on Saturday?
Combination
Mhm.
for sure. I think it was Brandon Marcello. Again, we can share the link or you can Google it, but looked around and the Big 12 had some of the most static coaching staffs in the country. Like just every conference had different dynamics, because again, some of these schools can go out and just pay for great coordinators and assistant coaches and pluck them from other teams. But the Big 12 had very little turnover from 1 to 16. Now you had new coaching staffs, I get that, but coaches that stayed put typically kept their coordinators or their position coaches for a while. So it's not unusual. And I don't know if it's because you're in the Big 12 you have to do this, but even in their own conference, it's not that strange. The Big 12 does have good coaching continuity. Um, listen, it just here's a guy who was in trouble. And if he was trying to do the conventional coach thing, you fire people and don't bring people back, and he didn't do that. Um, at some point, a coach is going to say, "It's you or me," and it ain't me, right? That's just what coaches do. They're cutthroat, and he didn't do that. And the most interesting thing about last season, Chris, is that he restored himself as offensive coordinator or play caller, I should say. He didn't hire from outside for offensive coordinator. He promoted a guy who's been with him for a while, and he didn't make any changes on the defensive staff. And they went 9-4. It worked. And it might not have been perfect, but if you can keep that core together, you get better than next year. So on Saturday, it didn't look great. And it might have been more of the guy in charge than the guy he's in charge of, but it didn't look great. Um, but that's not a problem you can fix right now. Like you can't go out and fire this guy and hire someone else right now because you're not going to do that. You're going to have a GA or an analyst coaching a position. You don't want that. I don't think you're better off right now after one game. Leaving those stones unturned. If problems persist, yeah, you got to turn things over and try to figure it out. But just not you're not there yet. Loyalty is just the way he's been. He's known these guys since he was growing up. He's been through battles with them at Troy and now here. Some of them at Kentucky and Texas Tech too. Um, and again, it worked last season. Why would he have changed it this offseason?
Our last question for the podcast portion of the mailbag. This one from Bryson Harvey. Points
It's
out
a good
that
one.
on the McAfee show and throughout his press conference this preseason, Neil has discussed how this is one of the most talented teams he's had and alluded to the fact that it is the best one in his time at WVU. Given that it's clear that Penn State is on a different level, talent-wise, and that Penn State isn't even at the same level as Alabama, etc., what is the best investment of recruiting resources moving forward?
One, well, I'm going to go in different order here. I'm going to do like a position and then a trait. But I want to hear your answer on this more than mine, Chris. Defensive line. Just you got to get to the quarterback. You don't want to be sending guys in the second and third level. You got to be able to stop the run conventionally. Whether you're 3 or 4 down, you've got to have the guys in droves that can do that. And like we said, that's not there right now. It's not. And then just speed. You just need speed. And they try both those. They go big for size and speed because the big guys don't get smaller and the fast guys don't get slower. So that's fine. But I would certainly at my skill position be looking for speed because you can get open easier on speed. You don't have to make contested catches and jump over people and do one-handed stuff if you're just wide open because you're too fast, or if you're juking people because you're too fast. And then I would just be obsessed with my defensive line, just my tackle, my end, my nose, and having like 2 or 3 of them in each position. That would be one thing I would try to do. You can control a whole lot if you're good on the defensive line. But while I have the recruiting guy card, Chris, that's just certainly you're more of your domain than mine.
I don't think anybody's going to like the answer I'm about to give because taking off of what you said earlier, building from within, building, recruiting, and building up from high school and all that stuff, that's great. But in order to have success with that, you have to do that. You have to stack them. You can't just do it one year. It needs to be 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 years in a row. And then after you do that 4 years in a row, you also have to retain them. You can't just recruit them, you have to retain them. And then if you're able to recruit for 4 straight years and retain for 4 straight years, you might have a chance, except as you pointed out, all the other big schools are just going to buy the soup, if you will, and be right there with you. The next part is, can you just buy the soup? Can West Virginia just buy the soup? No, they don't have the funds to buy the good soup. They have the funds to buy the Kirkland signature brand portion of the soup for you Costco shoppers out there. But so what's the answer? I like that you said speed there. And it kind of goes back to something I believe you and I talked about when we are like West Virginia's finding success because they're doing something different on offense. They're doing something different, and that's what's working. And I think West Virginia has to kind of zag when everyone else is zigging or zig when everyone else is zagging and try to find the personnel and the scheme and everything else that just might be different enough and special enough that they can get some wins, even if they're not recruiting at the highest level. And that would be, like you said, some kind of offense with a ton of speed, some kind of defense where you were just, hey, screw it. We're going all out to try to get to the quarterback. We're trying to create havoc, whatever it takes. So I don't think it's so much as a recruiting level, recruiting angle, um, whether it's how you allocate your resources, but more of a we need this type of player. We need to adjust our scheme and just get that and just hammer that home.
That's a great point. Yeah, it really is. I have no notes. That's good.
Well, good. We can end on that. That's a perfect way to end the podcast.
Okay, that's fair enough. I'll give you that one. Chris gets the win this week.
Yes.
Plenty more coming up.
Hey,
Again, news conference this week. Perhaps injury, personnel updates. We'll see. Hopefully, cramps are exercised, and I don't think West Virginia took any major ones out of the game. Burks and White both got back in. We'll certainly know for sure when Neil Brown talks at 1 o'clock, and then the regular cast of stories, podcast features throughout the week. Anything you want to plug here, Chris? Perhaps a promo.
yeah. Hey, 75% off still going on just for a couple more days. Jump in while you still can. Please don't complain 3 weeks from now when something's behind a paywall and it's great. Whether it's West Virginia's making a wild comeback or if it's Mike's first coaching hot board of the season,
Ooh,
be prepared. Just get 75% off now. Don't complain about it later. Jump in while you can.
it can't possibly be hot board season yet.
No, it's not even, it's not even close for me, but yeah.
All right, check back in 2 weeks, I guess. Until then, I'm Mike Casaza.
And I'm Chris Anderson.
We will talk to you then.